The goal is they're trying to put everybody in the entire world into the beast system. I'm very blunt about it. That's their goal. Get everybody, to take the mark so that they can't buy or sell without the approval of whoever's approving buying and selling. That's why they want to move everybody into a digital central bank digital currency system. Because once you have a digital currency, you've got a corporate coupon. You don't have a real currency. They can adjust the value or even turn it off your access to it altogether, depending on whether or not you're obedient. And that's the real name of the game: power, obedience. And when you're talking about that kind of power and that kind of obedience, you're talking about idolatry. So we're back to the spiritual problem. Mm-hmm. That's their agenda. That's their goal. Will they be successful? No. The story's already written.
This is our trial by fire moment right
this
now.
It may be, yes. It may not be if enough people wake up and realize that we have the power to stop it. It becomes the trial by fire if we don't do that, and an intervention is required to fix the problem. As long as we do that and don't realize that the agenda hasn't changed and that's what their agenda is, then we'll have our trial by fire, because they will not stop. That's the whole thing. The process will not stop. They will start telling people, well, you have to worship this way. You have to eat that way. You have to read this book, not that book, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, some people will say no, and then the death camps come. This is the way it has always been. You either fight now or pay later. I mean, that's just the way it is. This goes way back 2,000 years in the history of the West. Language is always the first thing the revolutionary attacks. It was true of the Gnostics in the 2nd century. It was true of the Bolsheviks inside of Russia in the 20th century. It's always where they start. And once they get you to make those seemingly minute little compromises of language in the name of their agenda, then they've got you. So there's an illuminated philosophy that begins to take hold in the late 18th century. We see the product of it in the French Revolution, in the early Revolution. So these people have not only to war against anything transcendent, that means they're also at war with the human soul. And this is a key point, because for them, human reason and reason itself means what? It means mere ratiocination. It means merely the collection and statistical analysis of data. Okay, that's what they mean by reason. And therefore, because they have truncated human reason in that fashion, they think that they can create a quote-unquote artificial intelligence that can mimic humanity, all right? Which, on that definition of reason, sure, they can do that. But if you go back to, let's say, the Middle Ages, or to the ancient philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics, and so on, they all have a very different understanding of reason. For them, reason is not merely the ratiocination part of the brain. For them, reason includes the creative imagination, the passion, or what we would say the emotions. It includes things like intuition. It includes things like experience. It includes things like subtle, nuanced judgment values. All of that, in other words, the entire emotional life of the human being is part of what they would call reason, and the people at the World Economic Forum. And scratch and sniff long enough with those people, always, 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 underneath it all, you're going to have nothing but a hardcore of nothing but materialism. There's no place for anything else, not the soul, not God, none of that. And that's the world they want to bring in. And
technology is their new spirituality.
Yeah, technology is their new spirituality. The internet, the cloud, the internet, the connectivity of bodies, or the Internet of Bodies, as some people are calling it. All of that is their version of the Communio Sanctorum, the communion of the saints. It's something to be brought about by technology, not by divine grace. So, in other words, we're living in the era of the great technological counterfeits, and it's only going to get worse. At the very moment that they fulfill their desires, that many of them will realize they've been chasing a false god. Some of them will continue along the demonic path and say, "Hey, this is great. We need to go all the way with this." And some will have their eyes opened at the very last minute and realize that they've been pursuing the wrong thing. And some, I imagine, of that crowd will actually flee from it and try to make up for what they've done. But the other thing, I suspect that they're going to make a tender, to use Catherine Fitz's words. They're going to tender for humanity. They're going to try and buy off humanity. And here's how they're going to do it. We're already seeing the signs. We will give you all the technology. And see if this doesn't sound like that famous passage of the temptation of Christ from the Gospels. All of these things are happening right now. We will give you all of this, including our techniques and technologies for life extension, for virtual immortality, if you will just accede and accept our governance of the world. In other words, worship us. That's what they're going for. This is, as I keep insisting, this is the big counterfeit choice that we're being offered of what the charge was. So, in other words, are they attempting to go back and recover that golden age? Absolutely.
That's what I meant to say, that golden age.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely. That's part of the project. If you look at the more radical versions of it, like Adam Weishaupt, the Bavarian Illuminati, well, again, what are they attempting to do? They're attempting to get back to that golden age of a classless society where there's no distinction between princes and people or religions and belief. All class distinctions, in other words, are eliminated. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a societal version of the Neoplatonic doctrine of divine simplicity, where everything is absolutely the same as everything else. It's all equal.
Beyond the forbidden.
Read the Foundation trilogy, because what he's doing in that is he's using science fiction as a commentary on what he sees the direction of society going. And one of the things he points out in those books, particularly the first three, is, he's dealing with a galactic empire. So in other words, humanity has spread throughout the entire galaxy and achieved this great height of scientific and technical achievement. And as a result of this, with robots and computers and so on doing more and more, eventually humanity begins to lose its knowledge of how to fix things. And eventually, of course, the robots and computers fall apart. And because there's not enough people that know how to fix things and do things, society itself falls apart. And this is my big worry. If you look at what's happening now, we have a lot of people that don't know how to do things because they're letting that do it for them. So my advice is, use your technology, but keep the notebooks. Remember how to print things out, write things out. And the other thing I think is essential, and this is particularly true for people like me, people like you, that write a lot. Be sure that you allow yourself time to write. There's something about the physical process of having to think as you're writing the words and being able to do it in such a fashion that you have very few cross-outs.
Do you mean write instead of typing, correct?
Right. That's exactly what I mean. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Amadeus. Have you ever seen that movie?
Maybe. It's not right.
It's about the life of Mozart. It was a big popular movie back in the late 1980s. And I forget what his name. F. Murray Abraham won an Oscar for his performance of the composer Salieri. And at a certain point in the movie, Salieri, of course, the way the movie portrays it, Salieri is just incredibly jealous of Mozart. And at one point, Mozart's wife brings Salieri a bunch of Mozart's music manuscripts to look at. And this is quite true of Mozart's actual music manuscripts. There are no crossouts. Everything was just written exactly as he had heard it in his head. There's no crossouts.
It's one flow.
As just one elegant flow of music. He put that much thought and that much accuracy in thinking, and then was able to translate that into the movement and strokes of the pen on the paper. J.S. Bach, if you look at his manuscripts, you'll see someone who will occasionally cross things out, but they're very, very few and far between. And you can tell when you look at his manuscripts that he's writing very quickly. You can tell the pen strokes are made as fast as he can make them. So in other words, I think there's a certain discipline of the mind that comes from sitting down and writing things out as opposed to typing them out. I have notebooks. I do a lot of my note taking on computer, but I have certain subjects or certain topics. There are a few notebooks over there on the bookshelf that I actually take the time to write out because it forces me to slow down and make my selection of words much more accurate. And I think we have to get back to that. Penmanship is not even being taught in schools anymore, and people can't write. And when we've lost the ability to write, what happens when the electromagnetic pulse hits and our computers and our electric typewriters don't work? So
I know. I just had to bring that up because I know the past couple times you probably remember my huge notepad.
Well, we're sitting here about 6 feet from a virtual pipe organ. Now, this to me is my dream fulfilled. I wish I'd had this technology available when I was a kid, instead of having to go fight church committees to be able to practice on their organs, and to be able, and to get the key to the church to be able to do so, and then reassure them, yeah, I'll give you so much money for the electric bill that it costs to power these dang things, Well, here I sit 6 feet away from a virtual pipe organ, and the technology is such that the picture of that pipe organ there in the Netherlands, that instrument is actually one of the virtual organs on my virtual pipe organ. So I can play that famous instrument in Holland right here in my living room because it's downloaded into the computer. So, there are advantages to technology.
So that's not bad.
That's not bad at all. Of course not. And the nice thing for me is I've noticed, being an organist, there was a period of time in the 80s and 90s, I noticed no one was learning the instrument. And no one was learning the instrument precisely because it was so hard to get practice time on it. Now I'm noticing on YouTube, a lot of young people, particularly in Europe, are taking up organ because of these things. That you can literally pull famous organs and sound samples from famous organs around the world and put it on your home virtual pipe organ and, be able to practice on that instrument and learn what it sounds like. There's four different instruments on this virtual organ, and there's also a virtual pedal harpsichord on it in addition to that. So, I've got everything right here that I wish I'd had, 30 or 40 years ago. And had I had it, I may not have, taken the career turn that I did now and ended up here. But yeah, technology's not bad in that sense. You just got to be careful not to let it take over.
So
there is a difference. In other words, there's a difference between playing this and playing the actual pipe organ. I can hear it. Now, most people wouldn't be able to, but an organist can. But the advantage is it allows, if I ever play any of these instruments, it allows me to go in and know exactly what the instrument has and what I can do with it. So yeah, there's advantages to technology and there's disadvantages
And a lot of this, with AI, transhumanism, technologies, it's advanced technologies, it all connects. Just like a lot of your books connect.
Yeah.
Every one of them in one way or another. So, transhumanism is being newly marketed and called biodigital convergence. So here, I think this was, I don't know, I looked it up. I don't know where I found it. But biodigital convergence refers to the merging of biological systems and digital technologies leading to innovative applications and a potential reshaping of our understanding of life and technology. This convergence involves integrating digital technologies into living organisms and incorporating biological components into digital technologies, creating new hybrid forms. What the hell, Joseph? I think I will just...
that's the word for it.
Well, I think I would just stick to transhumanism.
Well, yeah, I would too. This is the other thing they're always doing, is they're always changing the language. And there's a reason why they're always changing the language. If they can make people dance to their linguistic tune just at the time that you think you've caught up and shown that you're on board with their agenda by using the language they want you to use, they change the language. And there's a reason for that. There's no end to the process. It's the process itself that empowers them. This is why I keep, people think I'm nuts for insisting on calling the Ukraine. Okay? That's proper English. That's the way I was taught to refer to that region and to that country, the Ukraine. It's the Netherlands. It's the United Kingdom. It's the United States, and so on and so forth. So politicians have decided, okay, we're going to listen to the Ukrainian government lecture us on how it makes them feel when we refer to the Ukraine. So we're just going to drop the definite article because they don't have definite articles in the Slavic languages. This is the other thing that just drives me absolutely nuts. All of a sudden, we're being asked to make English conform to rules of grammar that are not part of the English language at all. So yeah, they're always changing the agenda on us and trying to cloak the agenda behind all of this pretzel talk, to use the phrase that Catherine Fitz uses. And that's what they're doing. There's never going to be an end to it. This is what people have got to get through their heads. And therefore, if there's no end to it, don't start with their agenda. I'm an old-fashioned curmudgeon, Mike. I still use he as the pars pro toto rhetorical usage when I'm referring to humanity, be they male or female.
And
I still do that.
You are not it.
Yeah, we are not it's. No, we're not. And I don't think just because you use the pronoun he, that necessarily means you're thinking of a man, male, rather than humanity, period. So again, I'm very traditionalist in terms of diction and language, because language is always the first thing. Always, I guarantee you. This goes way back 2,000 years in the history of the West. Language is always the first thing the revolutionary attacks. It was true of the Gnostics in the 2nd century. It was true of the Bolsheviks inside of Russia in the 20th century. It's always where they start. And once they get you to make those seemingly minute little compromises of language in the name of their agenda, then they've got you. It's a little like the boiling frog. You're just slowly turning up the temperature.
You're just talking about traditions.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised the same way.
Mm-hmm.
My mother, very Southern.
Yeah.
My dad was always on the road doing shutdown work, paper mills, power plants, and my mother raised me right. And she was smart enough to only have one child because she knew that we couldn't afford it.
Right.
So I don't want to go down that road with. Anyway, we might. So given that occult traditions have long envisioned a path towards, let's say, collective consciousness or a global brain, could the rapid expansion of, let's say, the internet, artificial intelligence, advancements in technology, and transhumanist technologies also be orchestrated steps in a long-standing blueprint aimed at establishing a world under centralized and hidden control?
Sure,
because
of course.
Is this their new Industrial Revolution? Is this their new, you could say, Schwab called it the Great Reset. Is this their Tower of Babel moment right now to merge us to a different way of life?
Yes. There is a lot of stuff that they're at war with. They're at war with God. They want to utterly erase any notion of any sort of divine transcendence from human culture and society. And I have to speak in abstractions that way, or in generalizations, and I normally don't like to do that for various reasons. But I put it in those vague terms because it's not just Christianity that they're against. It's any form of transcendence. You're dealing with these people with the modern day equivalent of the late 19th century, early 20th century Bolsheviks. They're militant atheists in disguise. They're hardened materialists in disguise.
But this didn't all start in 1849, did it?
With the
manifesto?
1848, yeah, it did. Yeah, it did. If you look at it, actually goes even further back. If you look at Galton, Charles Darwin's grandfather. If you look at Percy Shelley and some of his poetry, and don't get me wrong, folks, I like Shelley very much. I like his poetry very much. But nonetheless, there is a philosophy in people like that we're on our own and we have to make the best of it and all of this. So there's an illuminated philosophy that begins to take hold in the late 18th century. We see the product of it in the French Revolution, in the early Revolution. So these people have not only to war against anything transcendent, that means they're also at war with the human soul. And this is a key point, because for them, human reason and reason itself means what? It means mere ratiocination. It means merely the collection and statistical analysis of data. Okay, that's what they mean by reason. And therefore, because they have truncated human reason in that fashion, they think that they can create a quote-unquote artificial intelligence that can mimic humanity, all right? Which, on that definition of reason, sure, they can do that. But if you go back to, let's say, the Middle Ages, or to the ancient philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics, and so on, they all have a very different understanding of reason. For them, reason is not merely the ratiocination part of the brain. For them, reason includes the creative imagination, the passion, or what we would say the emotions. It includes things like intuition. It includes things like experience. It includes things like subtle, nuanced judgment values. All of that, in other words, the entire emotional life of the human being is part of what they would call reason. So in other words, it's a much bigger picture that you're getting with them than you're getting with people like Klaus von Bloschwab, as I like to call him, and the people at the World Economic Forum. And scratch and sniff long enough with those people, always, 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 underneath it all, you're going to have nothing but a hardcore of nothing but materialism. There's no place for anything else, not the soul, not God, none of that. And that's the world they want to bring in. And
technology is their new spirituality.
Yeah, technology is their new spirituality. The internet, the cloud, the internet, the connectivity of bodies, or the internet of bodies, as some people are calling it, all of that is their version of the communio sanctorum, the communion of the saints. It's something to be brought about by technology, not by divine grace. So, in other words, we're living in the era of the great technological counterfeits, and it's only going to get worse.
I'm glad you kind of went down that rabbit hole,
Uh-huh.
Because Nesta Webster,
Uh-huh.
she said in Secret Societies and Subversive Movements.
Oh boy,
I can't find the physical copy. Well, I can, but it's like $1,000.
Oh, where is it up to that now? I've got a copy.
Oh, well.
I paid about $25.
Well, if it's in decent condition,
it's worth $10,000.
I don't know about 10. I don't know about 10, but it's worth a good little penny.
$1,000.
But anyway, she said, quote,
uh-huh.
"It is idle to say that so insane a project can present to no danger to the world. The fact remains that an increasing number of people regard it with perfect equanimity.
Equanimity.
The phrase, quote, all civilizations have passed away, ours will doubtless pass away likewise, is constantly to be heard on the lips of apparently sane men and women who, whether they advocate such an eventuality or not, seem prepared to accept in a spirit of complete fatalism and to put up no resistance. The point they ignore is that when civilization existed only in isolated spots on the Earth's surface, it might pass away in one spot only to spring to life in another. But now that civilization is worldwide, the dream of a return to nature and joys of savagery conjured up by, you may say this name, Rousseau,
Is it, Rousseau?
Rousseau and Weishaupt can never be realized. Yet if civilization in the material sense cannot be destroyed, it is nonetheless possible to take the soul out of it, to reduce it to a dead and heartless machine without human feelings or divine aspirations. The Bolsheviks continue to exist amidst telephones, electric light, and other amenities of modern life, but they have almost killed the soul of Russia. In this sense, then civilization may pass away, not as the civilizations of the ancients world passed away, leaving only desert sands and crumbling ruins behind them, but vanishing from beneath the outward structure of our existing institutions. Here is the final goal of the revolution.
Yeah, it is. And
my glasses here. I don't need
well,
my glasses
she has it right about the revolutionary movements, because they were ultimately movements against the soul.
This was written book 30s?
No, it was 20s? Earlier than that. I think it was right at the end of World War One. I think about 1919 or 1920. But the thing that she pegs there is the lack of humanity and soul in those regimes, and more particularly in their philosophical cosmology. She's absolutely right. And this is why I think people really get modern Russia so wrong. Because if you look at modern Russia, what the Russians are attempting to do is put the soul back into things that, Soviet communism very nearly stamped out altogether. And look at what the Soviet regime was, or for that matter, look at what the Nazi regime was. These were technocratic, technologically sophisticated regimes par excellence. And there was no place for any transcendent authority over and against the government. And this is what they want to bring in, into this country and into the rest of the West. They tried it at the French Revolution, by taking all the churches in Paris and turning them into what? Temples of reason. So this and again, it's that ratiocination reason that they're talking about. Remember, this is following the period of the great French encyclopedias. We're going to take all human knowledge and reduce it to a book form that we can put in an encyclopedia, and all you have to do is go look up all this knowledge in the encyclopedia. So yeah, it's an old agenda. It's an old regime, and here's the good news, and it's also bad news. They always fail. They always fail.
She quoted, also, I'm not going to read the entire thing that I have highlighted here, but she also quoted Rabaud de Saint-Étienne, I guess.
Let me see.
Right here. On the bottom.
Robert de Saint Etienne.
So it says, quote, everything must be destroyed since everything must be remade.
Yeah. That is classic.
And she's quoting these people from
Yeah.
over 100.
Yeah. And that statement in itself is kind of a classical nihilistic Gnostic way of putting things. In order to rebuild, we have to break a few eggs in order to make an omelet. The problem is that these people never get around to making the omelet. They're just about breaking the eggs. And that really is all they can do, because that's their process. They've got to tear down everything traditional in order to bring in their utopia. But the problem is, tradition goes in a lot of different directions, and there's so much to tear down before they can start building their utopia. And it always comes back to that. They're never going to finish. This is my point. Here's the test. And a friend of mine told this to me once, years and years ago, and I'm going to borrow his idea here with credit to KM for putting it this way to me. Ask a progressive sometime, how much progress is enough? And they'll have no answer. And the reason they have no answer, they'll dance around the issue, but there's really no answer, because it's the process itself that empowers them. Once they claim to have arrived, then their whole raison d'etre, the whole reason for their political existence, evaporates. So you can never achieve the communist utopia that you're promising everybody, ever, because then they lose power.
So in part 2, we'll be talking more of current affairs, and because I feel like things have shifted with, you could say, the deep state. We got a couple of different factions, it seems like. Things have definitely exponentially changed and altered since our last conversations. So that'll be more you could call it the New World Order, the Great Reset, blah, blah, blah. But I still want to stick to AI, transhumanism, but is one of the goals of these brotherhood elites, whatever you want to call them, to transcend Earth and man to live in this? Because you said, we ask progressive, when is enough? They really won't have an answer.
They never do.
It's the process. Here's what I think. But let's say they continue to go down that path. Well, what we'll see, Joseph, is like an AI-driven Blade Runner, love the movie Blade Runner, type dystopian world, and where everything's automated but my thing is, where does that leave? I asked you this before, and maybe you have a different perspective on it now since things have changed. But where does that leave us, or where does that leave them? The 1%, or whatever you like to call them, the globaloni.
The globaloni.
Where does that leave them if AI takes over the world? Their God takes over the world. Where does that leave them if will that make them obsolete?
Some of that's a very good question. First of all, just look at what's happened with some AI and some of the stories being reported already about AI threatening to kill people or blackmail people and so on and so forth. We hear these stories all the time. Quite frankly, I believe them. This is what happens when you program out of the picture the whole idea of human passion, wisdom, experience, creative imagination, intuition, and so on. You're losing the moral component of intelligence. All you're ending up with, to use a crude analogy, is a kind of cold-blooded reptilian intelligence that can only view other things or other beings as food. Okay, so that's number one. But you're right to ask the question, because I think it's at the very moment that they fulfill their desires that many of them will realize they've been chasing a false god. Some of them will continue along the demonic path and say, hey, this is great. We need to go all the way with this. And some will have their eyes opened at the very last minute and realize that they've been pursuing the wrong thing. And some, I imagine, of that crowd will actually flee from it and try to make up for what they've done. But the other thing I suspect that they're going to make a tender, to use Catherine Fitz's words. They're going to tender for humanity. They're going to try and buy off humanity. And here's how they're going to do it. We're already seeing the signs. We will give you all the technology. And see if this doesn't sound like that famous passage of the temptation of Christ from the Gospels. All of these things are happening right now. We will give you all of this, including our techniques and technologies for life extension, for virtual immortality, if you will just accede and accept our governance of the world. In other words, worship us. That's what they're going for. This is, as I keep insisting, this is the big counterfeit choice that we're being offered. Now, what will most humanity do if that's the tender? We'll give you virtual immortality in return for your obeisance and obedience. Well, most humanity will probably take it. Very few are going to say, no, that's a false immortality. And here's the problem. Way back when I wrote the very first Giza Death Star book, in the very first book, I talked about virtual immortality. That was 21 years ago because, it was being talked about privately amongst these global elites or whatever you wish to call them, even back then, if not long before. And I pointed out, what happens if you give virtual immortality to, let's say, a Mother Teresa? Well, she'll have a long time to go around the world doing a lot of good things. Okay. What happens if you give virtual immortality to a Mao Zedong or a Joseph Stalin? Well, they'll have a very long time to go around doing a lot of very bad things and killing a lot of people, much more than they actually did in their short 70-year span of life that they were given. So there's an ancient Christian saint by the name of St. John Chrysostom who said that it is precisely human death that cuts off our progress in evil and that allows and makes the possibility of repentance even possible. So in other words, the tender of virtual immortality is coming at what most people don't realize. It's coming at a huge moral cost. That cost could be nearly limitless progress in the good, but unfortunately, most of humanity is tinged with something not so good. And that can end in that progress in a kind of virtually infinite progress in evil. So I don't look upon any of these developments that they're talking about with yay, yay, hip, hip, hooray, let's go in and do the French Revolution version 2.0.
And you're talking about the issues. Also, what are the psychological consequences also of living in this type of dystopian tech-saturated world, where we're living in electromagnetic super frequencies and everything. And everything's deliberately amplified.
Yeah, that's exactly
to
it.
weaken the human experience, the family life.
Yeah.
Dumb us down.
Yeah.
What is that doing on the psychological? I'm not even talking about spiritual. We didn't talk a little bit about spiritual.
You can't separate spiritual and psychological. The psychological is the spiritual. The spiritual is the psychological. Because, the thing that people have forgotten because they've forgotten, they've been torn away from tradition. And because of that, they don't remember what evil is. What is evil according to the most classical theological definitions? Well, it is an irrational opposition to the good. Notice what I just said. It's irrational. So in other words, at the very heart of all of this is a fundamental irrationality and unreasonability. There's that word again. It's fundamentally irrational. So this is why, being the traditionalist curmudgeon that I am, I've never really understood the so-called insanity defense, because isn't it insane to want to do and to do evil? Well, yeah, it is in some fundamental way. So what's going to happen, I think what you're getting at is that, yeah, this is the normal world we live in all the time. What technology does to it, and I like your word because I think it's absolutely exactly accurate. What technology does to it is it amplifies all of that. It multiplies it. I would say it's not even a multiplier. It's an exponentiation of what we normally have in normal life, and it makes all of that possibility, go off the scale. That's why it's going off the scale right now.
So with the amplified effect, just like, a sound system,
Mm-hmm.
much louder, more profound with amplifier.
Right.
So did they amplify, since we're using that word, did they inject us, let's say 100 years ago, with Rockefellers and dabbing into the educational system, the pharmaceuticals, vaccines, then tech started coming along. We went from over 100 years, basically horseback and buggy to Large Hadron Collider. So they're amplifying our existence because they think that can play us. It's almost like a conditioning effect, mind control conditioning effect to dumb us down. That makes us go along with this new revolution that they wants to go down.
Yep, absolutely I do. Absolutely I do. There's even, I love music. There's even people that have studied the differences in the types of sound wave shapes that you get from traditional musical instruments. And I'm going to pick on an instrument here, and I don't want people to leap down my throat, and electric guitars. Because if you look at the sound wave from an electric guitar, or the sound wave from one of my favorite instruments, the harpsichord, what kind of sound wave form does it make? Well, it's a sawtooth. It has jagged edges. Okay. To me, it's an unpleasant sound to listen to. And it began to fill our music, that type of sound wave. So I think, yes, there is a concerted effort in certain circles, not across the board. Most of these people pursuing a lot of this technology are just doing it because it's the thing to do. But I do think, absolutely, there is a certain narrow core of people that made a deliberate study of all of this technology and all of the techniques associated with it, that were attempting to figure out how they can use those technologies and techniques to manipulate the human mind. We need only think of MK Ultra in this country, or Operation Mockingbird in this country, or Artichoke, all of these mind manipulation programs. And I mentioned Operation Mockingbird in that because that attempt by the intelligence community to manipulate the media were components in this. So, absolutely, I think this is part of their agenda. At some point, you're going to deal with a core of people that realize, hey, we've got all of these means of power in our hands. We need to drive and use these means of power to drive the agenda. Just look, we just came through 4 years of the Biden-Joe regime. And I'm spelling it with the Chinese spelling here, folks. But we just came through 4 years of an absolutely off-the-charts, illegitimate regime pursuing by every illegal, underhanded means it could, including the use and manipulation of the media to create narratives to then drive lawfare. I mean, the whole thing was off the charts. And, if that isn't corrected, I'm skeptical that anyone is ever going to be brought to justice about it, but they have to be. And the reason they have to be punished, they have to serve time in prison. The reason they have to be is we don't have a republic without it. If you thought the last 4 years under Biden Joe were bad, just wait if you don't correct this. And I meant it when I said earlier, the French Revolution 2.0.
Exactly.
And with French Revolution, I'm including the blood in the streets.
And that's we're gonna be diving into more of that in part 2. And you know my wife, she's a psych nurse.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not gonna find this on Google.
No.
No. About this. Any of this. Or any kind of AI system.
No.
But she tells me that she said you're not gonna find on Google, but you're not gonna find, they are fast forwarding whatever word you want to say. And they don't really use insane asylums now, but psychological institutions. People were having mental collapses.
Mm-hmm.
Her job security will always be there.
Yeah.
They are in the need of more nurses to go into that branch of the medical field and the psychological aspect.
Oh, I can believe it.
But you're not going to find that because that's all owned and operated, I guess, by DARPA. Who knows? Because they don't want people to know how bad it's really getting.
Oh, it's getting very bad. And you mentioned Google and search engines. This is where I think, again, people really have to buckle down and understand that you cannot have, and I'm going to crawl way out off to the end of the twig of speculation and do a nosedive off of it here. I'm going to sound absolutely crazy.
I love it.
You cannot have a functioning culture or society that is 100% digital. Analog is absolutely necessary for the rational, sane functioning of any culture and society. What do I mean?
We're talking about your and I's perspective and other people that are listening to this, but they want everything to be digital.
They want everything to be digital. Okay? And for me, it's very simple. And I go back to something I've said many times. Number one, the only canonical form of my books is the hard copy. I will not permit any of my books to be published by my publisher or publishers as ebooks. Why? Because ebooks can change the formatting, which therefore necessitates a change in citation. So in other words, when I footnote, I'm directing you to a specific edition of a specific book, to the specific page that you can turn to that page number and look exactly where I got that idea or that quotation. An ebook will change the formatting, so I can no longer refer to a specific page. So if you notice what's happened as a result of the change in academic citation orthography, modern Americans are not even taught how to do it that way. The other thing that happens, and it's much more disturbing to me, is that by simply changing a search engine, you can, and the algorithm of the search engine, you can obliterate whole swaths of human knowledge. For example, I just had someone email me a question that they put to their chat AI bot, or whatever the heck they're calling these things these days. Direct me to sources about plasma life hypothesis. And the AI returned the answer, there's no such thing as plasma life. Well, on the contrary, Robert Temple has just written a book about it, and it was a bestseller last year. I followed it up with a book of my own on the same thing. So, yeah. So the problem here is, if you don't know how to use, and I'm very serious here, folks, if you don't know how to use the card catalog in a good old-fashioned library and go and look things up, you're at the beck and call of an artificial intelligence that may just completely obliterate all sorts of information. In other words, hard copy, analog copy, and the ability to know how to use it is absolutely essential for society to function. If you think you're going to have secure currency through stable coins, like we just got passed in this bill, another version of a kleptocurrency, think again. What you need is the hard copy, the gold coin or the paper certificate or something. You need that in order to function and have a functioning society and culture. Digital ain't going to do it for you. And here's the other thing that I've heard. You mentioned your wife being in mental health profession as a nurse. The other thing I'm seeing is reports of people that are literally becoming psychologically bonded to their artificial intelligences to the extent that when those intelligences are taken away from them, they're suffering all these mental collapses and mental disorders.
They're like a crackhead needing a fix.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
And I meant to ask you this also before, but we kind of went, like you say, around Harvey's barn a little bit. So mental health is, of course, at an all-time high. People are being committed to mental health facilities. People are using forms of escapism.
Yep.
Like social media,
yep.
drugs, alcohol, blah, blah, blah. Suicide rate is also at a high, and it seems like each year is getting worse. I can account through my wife for all the mental health and all this mess. So what are the psychological consequences of living in this dystopian clown world where highly advanced technologies, genetic engineering, transhumanism, artificial intelligence, etc., have on our mental health? How would the mental health of individuals who are enhanced and possess augmented abilities, either now or in the future, behave on a psychological basis also? If these individuals, if we keep going down this road, people like you and I, people were not enhanced through, well, I guess maybe medicate, you know what I mean? Like augmented, like brain implants, things under the skin, all that. People that go down that road, we're facing that soon. How will the psychological aspects play on them? Because frequencies and all this and,
Well, the short answer is, I don't know. Okay?
You're not going to find out, right?
Wait a minute. I don't know. Number one. Number two, I have no inclination to find out. You're correct. And number three, they don't know either.
It's kind of scary, right?
That's hugely scary. Because what they're proposing to do is exactly what was done during the COVID plan scamdemic. They're planning to turn all of humanity into their human petri dish to find out what happens when we implant people with cyborg implants in their brain. And only then can we do the intergenerational, communal, group impact, environmental impact studies, because it's going to take doing that to all of humanity to find out what happens when you do that. So in other words, they don't know. So all of my point is, just like we were told, hey, these experimental vaccines, pardon me, I'm going to call them by the proper name, these experimental vaccines that are completely new types of vaccines with mRNA nanotechnology embedded in them, we can assure you that they're safe and effective, even though we haven't subjected them to any long-term controlled scientific testing over several generations with control groups. Now, we're being asked, in other words, to accept as scientific something that has undergone no scientific testing. And that's what they're planning to do with the cyborg brain implants. And they're going to sell it, please note, they're going to use their old marketing tactic of, think of all the benefits and wonders that we can do with this stuff. Mother Teresa, if she lives forever, will be able to do all sorts of good. We're going to heal you of your spinal injury and allow you to walk again or see or not be blind or have
but Michael, don't you want your 2-year-old child to not get lost or kidnapped?
Yes, bingo.
You need this implant.
Bingo.
F off.
Yeah, that's exactly my words too.
You might not use F though.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. No, we're being asked to accept all this on what? Here comes that magic word that they don't like to use except when it applies to them. We're being asked to accept all this on faith. So again, we're being offered a counter or trust. We're being we're being offered the counterfeit, and it's got all the religious trappings tied up with it that they claim that they're against. It boggles my mind sometimes how breathless and brazen these people are in what they're trying to promote, and the fact that they can't see an inherent contradiction if it came up on the street and slapped them in the face.
You just said a word, and of course we'll go back around Harvey's barn.
Oh, I love doing that.
But you said counterfeit.
Yeah.
I may have it in my notes. I got tons of notes, but you said something about counterfeit, and this is a counterfeit reality.
Yeah.
The counterfeit world. Because I would, if I had to guess, according to your research and so many others, you could say, I guess, we have fallen from grace. We have fallen from a higher standard of living, even in the recent times.
Right. Yeah.
Everything, and it could go back to your cosmic war hypothesis.
Well, he's very much so.
or the Atlantean society.
Right.
You made me think that it's not really it wasn't a place, it was a culture, a society,
it was
global.
A thing.
It's a thing. But is that what they're trying to do? Is replicate? They are. I got to bring forward. Well, are they plagiarizing in a way? I know that's maybe not a good word to use. What was once lost many centuries ago?
They are. Yes. There is.
And ideologies also.
There is a strain within Freemasonry that I talked about in the second and third Giza Death Star books in their original form. Particularly in the third one, there is a strain within Masonry, just to pick one example of one of these groups, that in the charges, in some of the early versions of the charges that were given during the Master Mason degree to a candidate for that degree, one of the charges, and incidentally, this was a charge that George Washington himself knew because he himself read it and responded to it when he was initiated as a Master Mason. So the charges have changed over time, but back in that day, one of the charges was that the Mason was to learn how to turn, listen to the words, to turn the flood and to recover a lost science and knowledge. That was pretty much the paraphrase of what the charge was. So, in other words, are they attempting to go back and recover that golden age? Absolutely.
That's what I meant to say, that golden age.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely. That's part of the project. If you look at the more radical versions of it, like Adam Weishaupt, the Bavarian Illuminati, well, again, what are they attempting to do? They're attempting to get back to that golden age of a classless society where there's no distinction between princes and people or religions and belief, all class distinctions, in other words, are eliminated. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a societal version of the Neoplatonic doctrine of divine simplicity, where everything is absolutely the same as everything else. It's all equal. It's all identical. So in other words, there's a deep-rooted philosophical concept that's at the core of all of this stuff that's been going on. The other thing that I think that they're trying to do very self-consciously, I've been warning people for years on my website, trying to get them to wake up and see the religious aspects of what's going on and to understand that they've been had by ignoring all of that stuff. By ignoring it, the counterfeit can come in. Well, just look at the term antichrist for a minute. In the Greek, the preposition anti can mean two things. It can mean against, and it can mean in place of. And it's that in place of that's the counterfeit. What is counterfeit money? Well, it's money in place of the authentic thing. And if you don't catch the counterfeit, well, you can go spend it. Get real money. That's how the counterfeiter makes money. He takes his substitute, goes out, buys something cheap with it, and gets change in real money. Okay. So this is what they're doing. It's as old as counterfeiting itself. They're getting a profit off of all of it. And, once we've said profit, ding, 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 there we are, Mr. Globalone, Klaus Schwab, all of the rest.
And you mentioned golden age, and that was the word that's what I was trying to think of. With the golden age, did we live in a Saturnian world, Saturn worship, Greece? I guess if you see where I'm trying to go and get at, because where Saturn was the god of that.
Let me put it to you this way, exactly like
because you have Musk and his emblem on that. What are we get? Oh, and also the inauguration of Trump and Melania, how they dressed, how she dressed, or whatever. Like, it's this weird dichotomy.
These people speak in symbols all the time. And learning to read the symbols that they speak in is crucial. Okay, they all do it. Was the golden age a Saturnian age, or a Saturnian theme, civilization? And my answer to that has always been, in a roundabout way, yes, because the whole reason I wrote my book, The Cosmic War, was one of them was I just finally got sick of listening to everybody in the so-called New Age movement bloviating about higher consciousness and what a wonderful world is around the world, would be around the corner if we just adopt the higher consciousness and love everybody and blah, 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 and open ourselves to all the new revelations and new technology. You've heard these people talk. And it's all pretzel talk. But what they never tell you is, I go back and read those ancient manuscripts that I include in my books, and everywhere from the Vedas to Mesopotamian epics to Egypt to Australian Aborigine lore to ancient Chinese lore that was preserved in the Analects of Confucius, all of it talks about an ancient time when, yes, there was a very sophisticated, high technological culture, but it was also evil and wicked and blew itself apart in catastrophic wars. So, reconstructing the golden age to me is, you want to bring all that back? You want to worship the old gods and, sacrifice your firstborn to Moloch? There's a reason that Rome, imagine this, Rome, the Roman Republic, with all of its barbarism and cruelty. We've seen the films of the gladiatorial fights in the arenas. We know what kind of blood sports went on. It's a matter of record. But nonetheless, Rome produced a Cicero. And what did Cicero say? Delenda est Carthago. Carthage must be destroyed. Why? Why did Rome say that? Because the barbarism being practiced in Carthage was absolutely off the charts when compared to what was going on in Rome. Infants were being sacrificed in their thousands to the Carthaginian gods. Do we want that here in Italy? No, thank you. So, they forget that this golden age wasn't really so golden at all. And I'm doing my best to try and warn people: beware people that want to return you to that ancient high civilization and golden age. It was anything but. Just look at the weapons that are talked about. Read the epic of Ninurta, and read the 7 tablets of the Enuma Elish, those Babylonian creation epics, and it's pretty blood curdling. You get right down to it.
So before we end this segment,
Mm-hmm.
and we can keep going down these rabbit holes, so, man, I ain't scratched this part of the discussion in my notes. There's just so much.
There's a lot.
It's a lot. But I had to ask you this, and this is where we end. What is just with this point, or genre, AI, transhumanism, technologies and all that, what is I know we didn't talk about some, but what is the ultimate goal, agenda that we're facing, or that they are trying to instill right now? And I know we didn't kind of talk about it, but I had to mention that. And do you see hope for us? Do you see hope that we will?
Sure I do.
Or do you think we'll just continue to be cogs in the machine down the road? How is the future? What is your outlook looking right now?
The goal is they're trying to put everybody in the entire world into the beast system. I'm very blunt about it. That's their goal. Get everybody, to take the mark so that they can't buy or sell without the approval of whoever's approving buying and selling. That's why they want to move everybody into a digital central bank digital currency system. Because once you have a digital currency, you've got a corporate coupon. You don't have a real currency. They can adjust the value or even turn it off your access to it altogether, depending on whether or not you're obedient. And that's the real name of the game: power, obedience. And when you're talking about that kind of power and that kind of obedience, you're talking about idolatry. So we're back to the spiritual problem. That's their agenda. That's their goal. Will they be successful? No. The story's already written.
This is our trial by fire moment right
this
now.
It may be, yes. It may not be if enough people wake up and realize that we have the power to stop it. It becomes the trial by fire if we don't do that, and an intervention is required to fix the problem. So long as we will not subject ourselves to it and will fight it, then it's not our trial by fire. Follow me? Mm-hmm. In other words, I put it to a famous Roman Catholic author years and years ago when we were in private correspondence. I put it to him this way: apostasy is always man's act, never God's. Always. So in other words, so long as we're willing to go along with the Genius Act and central bank digital currencies, or the latest scam, the private state bullion depositories with their electronic transfer systems, all of this junk that we're being sold as, hey, this is the latest thing that's going to free us from Mr. Global on his control. As long as we do that and don't realize that the agenda hasn't changed and that's what their agenda is, then we'll have our trial by fire, because they will not stop. That's the whole thing. The process will not stop. They will start telling people, well, you have to worship this way. You have to eat that way. You have to read this book, not that book, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, some people will say no, and then the death camps come. This is the way it has always been. You either fight now or pay later. I mean, that's just the way it is.
One last question for this segment.
Sure.
This wasn't even part of my notes.
Okay.
So we already know. I went to the store earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It was a madhouse. It was a madhouse. Well, before I bring that up, I promise this is where we're in the segment.
Okay.
So last night I was just looking. I don't know. TV was on. I was just looking at on my Google Maps, whatever. This place, it's like a circuit board. We all know that. People that's been researching that, yes, we know cities are like circuit boards and blah, blah, blah. The Matrix had a metaphor, you know, for like batteries. But I know that. But I had this epiphany or whatever this morning. When I went in the store, everybody's just like bumping into me, and they're in a hurry because it was actually around lunch, I guess. They were in a hurry to get back to work.
Yes.
Hurry. What are they getting back to work for? Because everybody's work, it's like a collective type society, because everybody's job in one way or another, one shape or fashion, helps keep this society moving forward.
Right.
And then it just don't, I know we know this, but it was just this weird, I don't want to say like outer body experience or whatever, but I started thinking circuit board, battery. They heard me back to work because they are that energy.
Yes.
They are that battery to keep this system going.
Yes.
And that's not a bad thing, but the way things are going, it kind of is a bad thing. So our energy, our battery, is fueling this system that they created to push this dystopian world.
It's being harvested.
Yes. And we already know this, but it's this weird outer body new age download. It's like, whoa, it hit me hard, Joseph. Seeing all the people just rushing, you know.
I just had 2 books come out on the American War between the states. The first one was called The Rialto Enrichment. The second is called The Rialto Enrichment Reconstructed. Okay? And there's a reason I wrote these books about the Civil War now. Because if you know what was done to the South during Reconstruction, take all of that, blow it up to a global scale, and that's what you're watching now. In other words, people, you know, they in order to recoup all the debt that was brought on by the war, what did they do? What did the financiers of the world do? They basically contrived a means to put a lien on the labor of the South, black or white, didn't matter to them. You know? And basically what they did was they kept the South in poverty for about a half a century. In fact, really, all the way up to Roosevelt, if not beyond. So they're doing the same thing again, folks. This is not new. And this is why they don't want you learning history from any other source other than Google AI. Perish the thought you go out and read a book. You know. What's interesting is that the Civil War, in the process of researching these books, I discovered that all the old scholarship that had been achieved in this country, largely this country, but a few others, after the war between the states, all of that scholarship, which was very meticulous and went in probing detail into what happened under quote-unquote Reconstruction, that old scholarship was very, very hard to find. It's as if they went in with a vacuum cleaner and just pulled it right off the shelves to prevent people from looking at it. And I encountered the same thing when I was researching Financial Vipers of Venice. There were certain sources that I absolutely feel in my bones the powers that be went out and bought up every copy to prevent people from reading them because of the information in those books. You know, I paid $900 for a couple of books to write Financial Vipers of Venice. And when I read what was in them, I figured, now I know why I paid $900 for it. You know, because they don't want people to know this stuff. Because if people, you know, knowledge is the first step to power. It's the first thing that allows you to see through their agenda. So, we've been here before. And we can either ring down the show and do nothing about it this time around, or we can do something about it and keep the show going. You know, I hope we'll pick that path, because we don't want the intervention path. Those get messy.
Well, Joseph, thank you very much, man.
Yep, thank you.